Welcome back, everyone. For today's video, we are going to be taking a look at the game that I played in my first round, or the second round of the tournament here in the FIDE World Cup being held in Baku, Azerbaijan. Now, obviously, this event is a little bit different. It's a knockout format. You play one game with white, one game with black. If you're tied after two games, there's rapid, blitz, no Armageddon this year, just playing up blitz till someone wins. But at any rate, it's a match format, so it's quite different than a lot of events that I've played in recent times. So you guys, let's jump into the game. So my first game of this event, first game of the second round, I'm playing with the white pieces against Karthik Venkataraman. I might be mispronouncing that, but at any rate, it is what it is. All right, so I start with the white piece now. Karthik did win against my fellow American countryman, Gregory Kaidanov, in round one. So I was looking at some of his games, and I was taking this very seriously. All right, so straight to the game. The game starts with the move 1e4. Karthik plays the move 1e5. And now I play the move knight f3, knight c6, and bishop b5. Now, as I said in my interview after the game on my Kick channel, I had a feeling that Karthik was probably going to play the e4, e5. Even though he doesn't play it all that frequently, he did play it in the first round against Gregory Kaidanov. So I play bishop b5, we get a6, bishop a4, knight f6 castles, and he plays b5. In the past, Karthik has almost always played the Breyer system with bishop to e7, and after rook e1, b5, bishop b3, just to show you guys d6, c3, castles h3, knight to b8, d4, knight bd7, knight bd2, bishop b7, followed by rook e8 and bishop f8. This, of course, is a favorite of the former world chess champion Magnus Carlsen as well. Now, with Karthik having not played e5 a whole lot, I was expecting him to surprise me, and true to form, he does. He plays b5, bishop b3, and bishop c5. Now, this, of course, is what we call the Archangel variation in the Ruy Lopez. Now, I have faced it many times, and I've played many different variations, and because I hadn't prepared for this variation before the game, of course I wasn't expecting it, I spent quite a bit of time here trying to figure out what the best approach was. Now, what I ultimately concluded is that because I hadn't looked at it before the game, and because the player is a little bit lower rated, and he hasn't played the system, I wanted to try to confuse him and play something a little bit more off the beaten path and not straightforward theory. So I play the move d3 here. Karthik plays d6, and now I play the move c3, and he plays h6. In this position, I play the move knight b to d2, and now he castles, and I play this move rook to e1. Now, what I was aiming for by playing this specific setup is I was trying to get back into something very similar to the Gucci piano. Now, normally the way you get into the Gucci piano is with bishop c4, bishop c5, and just to set it up, you got something like this, knight f6, castles, castles, knight bd2, a6, and normally white will play something like a4 here, although you could get a similar position with rook e1, b5, and bishop to b3. Now, this is very similar to the game, and that's what I was aiming for by playing this d3, c3. So, back to the game, we get to this position. After rook e1, we get rook e8. I play knight to f1. And now Karthik plays this move bishop b6. Now, the move that I was unsure about was whether he'd try to play for bishop e6 or whether he'd go for bishop b6, knight a5, and c5. Now, I was actually happy to see him play knight a5 here because after bishop to e6, maybe white has a very small advantage here after takes, and a4. But it's very, very minimal, and I think black should be completely fine. So he plays knight a5. I go bishop c2. And now he plays this move c5, trying to prevent me from playing d4. Now, the one drawback to playing this setup with d6 and c5 is that the bishop is on this very long diagonal, which at the moment is closed. So say I just play a move like rook b1. After c4, d4, the bishop remains closed, and now I have a nice center. And if black doesn't play for c4, the king can get a little bit loose here on the king side, because the bishop, ideally where you'd like the bishop to be, just to illustrate, is you'd love for the bishop to be, let's just say, on this f8 square. If the bishop is on f8, it guards these pawns against any threats on f5. But in the game, the bishop is all the way on the wrong side of the board here, where it's on this b6 square. Now, here I play h3 first. If I go knight h4, black can probably play this move bishop g4. If I play f3, I think after bishop e6 followed by d5, black should be a little bit better here. So I decide to play h3 first, stopping bishop to g4. Karthik plays knight c6, and now I go knight to h4, because at this point, I can't really play in the center anymore. d4, black is overprotecting the square with the bishop, the knight, and the pawns. So now I go knight h4, trying to put on knight on f5. Now, as we know, a knight on f5 can be worth at least a pawn, according to Garry Kasparov, another former world chess champion. So I'm trying to go for knight f5, and the bishop on b6 is completely offsides. So we get king to h7 here. And now I play knight h5, trying to bring the knight in here, maybe sacking on g7 or h6, potentially. So now we get knight to e7, and I trade the knights and play this move bishop to e3. Now at this point I was feeling very good about my position, because in this position it's very clear that I will either get f4 or d4. I am going to be able to break in the center. Now normally in a lot of these closed Spanishes, or even in the Gucci piano, whoever is able to play d5, f5, or d4, f4 normally gets an advantage. So after king to g8 here, I was feeling pretty good, and now I play this move f4. Now this move that I played felt thematic. I didn't necessarily calculate it all the way to the end, but it felt like the right move. Now shockingly, the computer does not think it's the best move. It thinks that queen to d2 is a little bit better. I'm not actually sure why, because after d5, apparently I can play, maybe I can even sack the bishop on h6 here, and perhaps this is good. Again, I'm very skeptical about this line, and looking at the computer evaluation, I really don't know what to make of it. The other thing is that because it's a match situation, not a situation where it's a one-off game, playing something like this with a sacrifice is very, very questionable, because if you lose the game with the white pieces, it's very difficult to win with the black pieces if you're down 1-0 in the second game. So you always want to keep the game somewhat under control, and you don't want to play too many speculative sacrifices. So I play f4 here in this position, and now we get d5 from Karthik, and now I spent a lot of time before taking. I did not think d5 was actually a very good move, because I thought that what I did in the game with e takes d5 had to be good for me, but as it turns out, d5 is in fact a very good move. Now if I could do it all over again, probably what I would have done is I would have traded the pawns in e5 and played this move bishop to f2. But after a move like d4, even queen to d6 here, I wasn't really sure where my advantage is. If I take on d5 after take, let's not rook e2. After rook takes e1, queen e1, and queen d5, black is going to get bishop b7 with a lot of threats on this long diagonal towards the pawn on g2, as well as being able to bring the rook to either the d8 or the e8 square. So I simply did not believe in this variation. So I decided to take, he took on f4, the next few moves played very quickly, we trade a bunch of pieces, he takes on d5, I go rook e8, king h7, and now I play this move bishop d6. Now, I spent a lot of time before taking on d5 because I was calculating this line here, and in my opinion, I felt like this had to be close to winning for me for a couple of reasons. First of all, the rook and the bishop are very passive. My bishop on c2 can become a very serious problem for black if I'm able to push the pawn and check the king. And after bishop d6, it feels like even the c5 pawn is weak, the bishop and the rook are passive, and I felt like there had to be something. Now, credit goes to my opponent here because he found some very good moves. First of all, he played g6, which I think might be the only move here. The reason I played bishop d6 instead of, say, d4 check is because after g6, bishop e5, threatening the checkmate in the corner here, black can go bishop b7, guarding the rook and stopping the checkmate on the h8 square. So I play bishop d6, and my idea is very simple. If black plays bishop b7 here, I can trade the rooks, play d4, which checks the king, and after black blocks, now I take the pawn, and the bishop guards the pawn, and I should win the game. So after bishop d6, Karthik plays g6 here, which stops any ideas of d4 creating the check on the king, and now I play this move knight to e4, and after c4, I play this move bishop c5. Now, I think it was in this position after g6 I spent about 20 minutes, because I was sure that in this position, c4 had to be winning. Now, I spent a lot of time because I was calculating c4, knight f6, rook e7, bishop e6, and rook b7. Now, for example, if black moves the bishop back to d8 here, after bishop b3, white should be very close to winning here for a couple of reasons. The pawn on c5 is very weak. If black tries to guard with rook c8, now I can take on b5, and there are all kinds of problems here. If you take on b5, you lose the bishop and you lose the game. And if you trade on b3 and then take on b5, now I can simply take the pawn on f7. So I thought this had to be winning, but then as I started calculating more and more, and I was looking at rook b7, I realized that there was this move knight d7. Now, at first glance, it still looks really good because I can play knight to e4 here, and let's just say black were to play pawn takes pawn, for example. Now I can play bishop to a4, overloading this knight on d7, and I should win the game. If you move the knight, you lose your bishop. If you guard the knight, there are a couple ways to win, but let's just say you can take the bishop or even go knight f6, forking the king and the rook. So it's looking very promising if black can't take. If he moves the bishop back to d8, again, bishop b3 creates a lot of problems because of the weak pawn on c5 and problems on the diagonal as well as the 7th rank. So this looks really, really good. But as I realized during my calculations, after knight to e4, there's this incredible move, rook to a7. Now, rook to a7 is a great move because the knight still guards the bishop, so I can't capture. I can't go to b8 because the knight captures. And if I try to take this knight on d7, after bishop takes d7, knight f6, forking the king and the bishop, black can simply move the king and the rook guards this bishop on d7. So it looks really, really good, but But as I said, during the game when I was calculating this, I couldn't figure it out. Now, there is a chance here to sack the rook with rook takes b6, knight takes b6, and bishop c5. But again, after rook b7, I wasn't really sure how good this is after knight f6, king g7, bishop d4, and king f8. Because I can force a repetition with bishop c5 and bishop d4. But if I play a move like b3, trying to create this connected chain of four pawns, black can go knight d7, trying to trade off the knights, and I really wasn't sure whether this was okay or not. As I mentioned before, in a match situation, if you go too far off the edge, you take too much risk and you're wrong, you could lose the game, and with it, effectively, you lose the match. So it's very, very tricky figuring out where the risk is, what the margins are that you have to play within. So I wasn't sure if this worked, and in the end, I decided instead to play knight e4. He plays c4 check, and now I play bishop c5, and now bishop b7 is played. And at this point, there is very limited play here, almost no advantage whatsoever. Now, on first glance, it looks quite good, because if black were to trade the pawns first and then play bishop b7, after takes, the trade, and knight c5, I'm actually probably winning here, because black does not have a good way to guard this pawn. If you play a5, you hang the pawn on b5. If you play a move like bishop d5, after knight a6, bishop a2, bishop b5, white simply has two connected passed pawns and should be winning the game. So he plays bishop b7 first, which is an excellent move. And now I play this move rook e5, simply trying to keep some play in the position. If I were to trade the rooks, trade the bishops, and then go knight c5, it's a little bit different here because black does not have to trade and create weaknesses with both of these pawns on a6 and b5. Instead, you can play a5 here. And now this b5 pawn cannot be targeted because black has not traded these pawns on d3. And effectively, white has nothing that he can do here to claim an advantage. If anything, I'd probably rather be black with this weakness on g2 and the 3-on-2 on the king side where black can push these pawns down the board. So I go rook e5. Karthik takes on d3 now. He trades here, which I think is a slight mistake, by the way. I think that in this position, probably rook to d8 would have simply been the best move, and I don't even know how I can claim an advantage here. One sample line would be, say, rook takes d5 here, but after rook takes d5, actually, this isn't the sample line because this just loses the game. One sample line would be takes, and I guess knight c5 here. But now black can maybe play knight d7 or knight to a4. I'm not sure which move is better, but both these moves should hold a draw. Instead, he decides to take on c5, and now I get this great bash in this knight on c5, and I can try to pretend that I have a small advantage. Game continues with knight f4. I go bishop f1, guarding the pawn on g2, as well as the pawn on h3, and now he plays bishop c6. Now, at this point in the game, really what I'm thinking about here is how can I try to create winning chances? Because I have a great knight on c5, and these pawns are a little bit loose. So if I could somehow get black to push a5, say black goes a5 here, after, say, knight b3, suddenly these pawns are very, very brittle on a5 and b5. You go b4, you hang a5. You play a4, I have knight d4, and I will win this pawn on b5, or I will win this bishop on c6. So that's really what I'm trying to do, is come up with concepts of how to try and win these two pawns. If I can win one or both of these pawns, I will win the game. So I go king f2 here. We get king g7, play g3, knight h5, not knight to d5, because after bishop g2, black is suddenly in a lot of trouble with this pin. You can't move the knight, you lose it. If you go here, you lose it this way as well. And if you play rook d8 to guard the knight, now I can play knight takes a6, and once again, I should win the game. So he goes knight to h5. Now I play this move rook to e7 here. We get bishop to d5, which I think is a slight mistake. I think knight to f6 and knight d5 would have simply drawn the game on the spot, but instead he plays bishop d5. Now I play this move pawn to a3. We get knight to f6, and now here I play the move bishop to e2. Now in this position, it's looking like probably it should be a draw here, but there are some chances that I can create some counterplay. For example, after h5, bishop f3, now the bishops are coming off the board. The knight on c5 is targeting the pawn on a6, and if black ever plays this move pawn to a5 here, I can simply trade the bishops and now play something like rook to e5, knight to f6, and something like knight d3, and suddenly these pawns are very, very brittle on a5 and b5. So Karthik trades the bishops on f3 here, as expected, and now he plays knight d5. I go rook b7, and now after a long think, my opponent finds, I think, maybe not the only move to draw, but I would say from a human perspective, the absolute best try, which is rook to c8. At this point, I was already feeling quite optimistic about my chances for a couple of reasons. First of all, the knight on d5 has no squares available. You'll notice that b6 and c7 are covered by my rook. e7 also covered. You can't go to b4 or c3 or f4. So even though this knight on d5 looks really good, it has no squares to jump to. Additionally, the king on g7, a little bit weak here. I have ideas like knight e6 and knight g5. And of course, you can't move this rook because then you lose the pawn on a6 as well as the pawn on b5. But to my opponent's credit, he spent a lot of time here. It's about 12 minutes, and he found this move rook c8, which is an excellent move for the following reason. After I play this move, knight takes a6, he has this great sacrifice, knight takes c3. Now, on first glance, you'll think, well, what's the big deal? You just take the knight. But the problem is if I take the knight and I go, let's just say king f2 here, black can now play this move h4. If I play g takes h4, after rook takes a3, let's just say knight c7, rook takes h3, I'm going to lose this pawn on h4. I can play something like knight e6, king f6, and knight d8, takes, and rook b7. Now, objectively, I can play this position forever, but let's just say I get this position, just to illustrate the point, even here, just to not king d5, just to show you guys the point. Even if I get this position with rook and knight versus rook, this is still theoretically a draw. Now, of course, I could have played this endgame out for another hour probably, but I didn't really think there were good practical chances to win this, so I didn't go into this endgame. So instead, I play this move rook c7. Now, I do have some chances maybe with this move knight c7, because after knight a4, knight takes b5, knight b2, I have this move rook takes f7. Now, I actually missed this during the game. The only line I considered was knight d6, but after rook c3, king g2, and let's just say knight c4 even, if I go rook f7, king g8, and if I play rook c7, there's knight e3 check, which actually wins the game for black. If I play like rook f6, for example, black can go king g7, knight e8, king h7, and with my passive king, the weak pawn on a3, objectively, this should be a draw. So I tried rook c7 instead. He plays rook a8, not rook takes rooks. After takes. Suddenly it gets very tricky. If black plays knight a4, b4, knight c3. After king e3 and king d4, I'm probably winning this game here because my king is marching towards the center. The pawn on b5 is very weak, and I'm getting two connected pass pawns that I can push down the board. So he plays rook a8, best move. I go rook c3, rook a6, and now here I play king e4, which after this move, or after my opponent's next move, there are no chances to win. What I probably should have tried here was something like rook c5, but after rook to b6 and say king to e3 here, I think that in this position after rook b8, probably it's still a draw, but maybe I have some chances. I also think b4 here might also be a draw, although maybe it's not so simple. I guess takes rook a2, rook c2, rook a4, rook c4, rook a2, and maybe king e4, and maybe I have a chance to win. Again, not really sure if this endgame is actually winning after takes and king d5, but there are some chances. So instead I play king e4, but after king e4 and this excellent move rook a4, any chance to win the game are gone here, because when I play b4, I simply overlook this very nice tactic rook to a8. Initially, I thought after b4 I'd have a chance to win, because let's just say black plays f5, I get king d5 and king c6 or king c5. If I win this pawn on b5, once again, I'm getting two connected pass pawns, and I should win the game. Now, even here, rook to a8 probably still saves it, but nonetheless, there's no need to go into any of that, and my opponent finds rook a8, and I play this move g4 here, effectively admitting that I can no longer win the game. The reason rook a8 is so good is because if I go king d5 trying to march over to the c file, there's rook d8 check, and regardless of which square I go to, let's just say c5 here, after rook c8 I have to go back to d4, and black can simply check forever, and it's a draw. And if I go away to e4, once again, black can just go back to a8 and spy on the a3 pawn. So I decided to play g4 here, and after these pawns come off the board, now there are no chances to win the game. The game sort of concludes peacefully after f6. I go king to f4 here. We get the move rook d8. I play rook c5, rook d4, king f3, rook d3. Without being able to keep the two connected pawns on the queen side, there are just no chances. I go king f2, takes, rook b3, cutting off the king on the third rank, but also keeping an eye on the pawn on b4. So here I go king g2, king f7, rook b6, king g7. I check, king h6, rook b5. Get king g7, I play rook b6. I could have just played rook b7, rook b5 to make the draw, but I felt like getting into the final position where neither side would have any pieces. So I go rook b6, king h6, I take, rook b4, king h3, we get king g5, and I play rook a6, and now rook b3 is played. If rook takes g4 were played, this actually would lose the game because I have rook a5 check, and after king f4, rook to a4, I win the rook on g4, and with it, I win the game. But of course, no grandmaster, especially with time on the clock, will make that blunder. So the game ends after rook b3, king g2, king takes g4, rook g6, king f5. I Play rook g3, rooks come off the board, and we get the classic king versus king position where neither side has checkmating material, so the game ends in a draw. So, not the greatest result from the first game. Obviously, when you're playing a 2-game match and you're playing with the white pieces, you want to put pressure on your opponent. That being said, I try to put pressure. My opponent found some good moves, and it is what it is. At the end of the day, as I've said many times, if you play a good game, your opponent finds the best moves. Chess is a draw, and in this case, my opponent was able to find those best moves. So, not what I was hoping for, but we still have a game tomorrow. I will be playing with the black pieces in the second game of the match. If the game is drawn, we will move to tie breaks the following day. If I win, obviously I move on. If I lose, I'm eliminated. So it's going to be an exciting day, but I hope you guys have enjoyed this recap from the first game that I'm playing here in the FIDE World Cup in Baku, Azerbaijan. And I will be back with another recap tomorrow, you guys. So I hope you've enjoyed it. Make sure to hit that subscribe button below if you haven't already, and I'll be back very soon. See you guys. Bye.